Now, I have a distinguished honor in presenting you with a couple of guys who know a lot more about the technology side than I do. The first is Brian Mitchinson, and Brian is the Chief Marketing Officer with Fluid. Fluid is upstairs. Come on up, Brian. Come on up. Brian and his company are upstairs, and they are featuring an artificial intelligence program that the North Face is using, and so we're going to have Brian speak to that. And then our second panelist is Steve Carlin, and Steve is the VP of Marketing and Business Development for the Americas, which sounds incredibly challenging. Yeah, and Steve is with Aldebrand, and Aldebrand is a division of Softbank, and Softbank is the company that brought us Pepper to the show. So welcome, gentlemen. Have a seat. Why don't you sit here so everybody can see you, and I will sit over here.
Spectacular.
Thank you.
You're actually quite impressive. I had no idea.
I know.
I have good days and bad days. So it really is great to have you here. I'm going to give you an elevator pitch here. So tell us in a minute or less what you do and why it matters.
Sure. So we are Aldebaran Robotics, soon to be Softbank Robotics. We are a division of Softbank. And we make humanoid robotics, which is, say, Pepper. And Pepper, as a humanoid companion robot, is designed to engage with you and to interact with you, to understand your emotions and react and respond accordingly. And so we are here because we feel like retail is actually one of the most amazing outlets for that sort of a device.
Now, you're powered by Watson, right? Or you work with Watson and IBM technology?
We have an agreement with Watson to sort of power the back end, the AI and the cloud computing.
Right, right on. Okay, Brian.
Yeah, and I'm gonna just switch that a little bit slightly and not talk so much about my company, but I can't help but riff on some of the things you talked about, which is in a world where Amazon is killing people on price and selection, really the opportunity is to experientiate. Create something that's going to inspire me to want to interact with your brand. And so when you look at images of kids holding phones up and watching meteorites, and we've all seen it, right, where you've been at a concert and literally people are not watching. They are consuming it via their phones. And so I think that generation is just so much more experiential than we were as a generation, that I think as brands, that is the only way forward, is to create phenomenal experiences. And so that's part of what I guess my company does. We create digital experiences, software that allows people to do things that you currently can't do very often.
And you've got an experience upstairs that you were working on with the North Face. Can you tell us just a bit about that, how that works?
Yeah, and so we partnered with IBM. We were one of the early ecosystem partners to take Watson to the consumer. And the idea was that if we could replicate the experience of your best sales rep. And so you've got your best rep, what do they do, what is their process, what are the questions, how do they interact with people, package that up into an AI solution that essentially mimics that behavior, then you could create a much more consistent, engaging experience for consumers.
And it is definitely. I used this demo, Brian shared a demo, and basically you can say to this program, I'm going to Chile on a ski trip, and it'll say, what time of year are you going? And then all of a sudden it starts leading you through all these questions that you would think would be intuitive kinds of questions that a human being would ask. But it's quite remarkable, so you should check it out. My question to you is, when we talk to technology companies and they talk about their technology, they always talk about it as an enhancement to the experience and that it's something that's really good. Then we hear from Oxford University that says, and it's going to put everyone out of work, right? So what do you say to those folks out there that look at what you're doing, whether it's robotics or artificial intelligence, and they're looking at it with a bit of a jaundiced eye and saying, hey, this is a bad thing? I mean, was it not Elon Musk that said AI could potentially be the most disastrous thing in the history of the planet, right? So what do you say to that?
Maybe. You know what I would say? I would say talk to this gentleman and find out that the store is the story. I think that is an incredible, powerful statement where you have a physical connection with consumers. My company, when we think of AI in the store, it's not replacing people. It's improving their ability to interact with consumers and tap weather patterns and tap detailed product insights that they wouldn't maybe necessarily have. And so we don't definitely see AI as the disastrous future and not replacing people, but augmenting the ability for people in store to create great experiences.
Yeah, and I think we would echo that. I think if you think about robotics in a retail setting or any business setting, really what you're thinking about is how do you replace repetitive low-level tasks? So robotics replacing activity is more about replacing tasks than it would be jobs. And that frees up the staff, which is one of the most important spends that retailers have, to focus on the higher order, more customized, if you will, sort of interactions with their shoppers, which are probably far more value add at the end of the day.
Yeah, I'm just
So
going to
you
rip
see it
on
as
that
a
quickly.
tool, not a replacement.
Yeah, and so looking at that, so if you're using robotics to replace the menial tasks and you're using AI to potentially augment their ability to talk about the product, then the question is, with that savings of time, the tasks, the detailed learning of products, what then can you have your sales team focus on? What can be that new thing that takes up their time? And the question I would say, is what story can they tell? What experience can they build? How can they turn your store into a much more interesting experience for consumers?
And I have to say, I agree with both of you. Yeah, I really do. I agree with you because I think that retail used to be a profession that you could be respected for working in. You could put your kids through school, you could buy a home on a retail salary, and then through the 80s and 90s, all of that went away, and now we're in a desperate fight to try and pay people more that work in retail. But as to your point, a lot of that is for low-level, low-value functions. So if we can take those away, likely there will be some job loss, but I think the jobs that remain will be much more fulfilling and redeeming, So if a company's interested in doing what you do, in employing what you create, right? So if they're interested in robotics, they're interested in AI, the big question is, how do they do it? How do they get a foot in the water? What kind of investment do they need to make, and where should they begin? What's the starting point to get into this and try some of this stuff? Because it all looks great, but nobody's trying it. Nobody's doing anything with it. Not in this continent, anyway.
So I think one of the things that we're hoping to do by being here is to find some pilot clients that want to work with us and really explore how Pepper could help sort of bring their store to life. And that would look like a period of time where we sit down and talk about the needs. As a retailer, they should have the best understanding of the situation, the dynamic of that shopper as they're in their store. And so we want to tap into that learning and that understanding and then say, okay, what kind of software do we need to put on Pepper so that it's a unique experience for you, back to your story.
So it comes back to the experience.
That's right.
I'm
so
glad
it
to
comes back to
hear
that
you say
experience and that story because it's a really important way for them to differentiate themselves in the marketplace. So for example, Nestle has been using Pepper in their Nescafe store within a store in Japan. And what they found is, one, Pepper is a very proactive tool to bring shoppers to Nescafe, right? So it's not a static end cap display. It reaches out to somebody, brings them in, engages them, and walks them through sort of what you were saying, sort of that, are you a coffee drinker? If so, all the way down the decision tree until they've figured out both what kind of coffee and what kind of percolator you might need for that coffee. And what they're seeing is double-digit increase in engagement, double-digit increase in sales, because they now have this experience and this story, like you're saying, to tell, utilizing this tool.
Yeah. So it's better than an end cap,
So it's
is
better
what you're
than
saying.
an end cap.
Wow.
You heard it here.
Imagine that.
You heard it here.
We're going to evolve beyond the end cap. Imagine that.
It's 1.2 million.
Artificial intelligence. So how do I get? What's the entry point for me in terms of working with that?
And that's a great question. And so when I look at, we're one use case at the moment. What we're doing is we're using AI to help make product recommendations. So essentially, it's a product recommendation engine. And so when you think then of how to get into that world, one of the keys is to start thinking about your product from a different perspective. Now, this may not be as true for this group, but generally speaking, when I'm talking to like e-commerce managers and people that are running commerce sites where we're going to plug in this software, they don't think of their products the way they need to. They tend to see it in kind of a very traditional web navigation system and and search system, which is not necessarily the way that consumers buy and think when they're in the in-store experience. And that kind of chasm between kind of how we created this sort of artificial world of e-commerce navigation versus how people actually buy is kind of interesting. And so you need to start thinking about how to bridge that gap, analyze how people buy. What are the things that they think about when they're buying, say, a jacket from the North Face? They care about the activity they're going to do. They care about the color. They care about the materials and kind of what the benefits are of those materials. And there's kind of all of these things that they will care about. Who it's for. It's for my daughter. Whoever it's for, and all of these things. You need to think through those kind of attributes. So what is the real issue with that product? How do people buy it? And then that gets lined up to AI.
That's
versus again, navigation.
Yeah, because that's very much the process. We've got some people from Shoot Gerdeman here as well. They designed the Retail Collective upstairs, but when we work together, that's very much the process, right? It's about mapping the experience and finding those inflection points within that experience where it's a critical kind of turning point for the consumer in terms of their decision-making process, right? Yeah. So you're saying map that out, identify those critical points, and then see if it's a solution that can be solved, a problem that can be solved with AI.
Now, one thing that is interesting about it is when we study kind of user behavior, so watching people interacting with the system, initially we had 3 questions until we made preliminary recommendations. And what we found was actually, for most users, they actually only needed 2. They didn't need to go so deep into each kind of next iteration of the product recommendation, so they didn't need to talk about material for their jacket recommendation. For the average consumer, that's just not who they are. It's really, I think I'm going to be cold and I'm going to be skiing. It's a little bit more basic.
Yeah. Otherwise, it gets onerous.
It gets onerous. Yeah. And so there's just kind of a world out there, I think, still to be discovered in terms of, how many recommendations do you make initially, and how do you do this? And I think smart people here in the room will be thinking about that.
I agree. Yeah. And Steve, I have a question just going back to your point about robotics and the introduction of that. So if I'm a retailer in Canada and I want to, put a pepper in my store, do you feel that there's any sort of, do I need to prepare my employees for that? Like, is there that freak out factor that people are going to start to think, oh my God, there's a robot in the store, am I next kind of thing? Or, do you think that there's any sort of education that needs to take place to just sort of get employees over to that way of thinking that, look, this is a means of enhancing the experience in our store, not replacing people?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think our first use cases wouldn't be about restocking shelves and going to the back room and pulling out inventory and doing a survey. It's really more about an extension of the communication plan that store already has. So we're using very static communication deliverables in the store, signage and what have you. Well, Pepper would be an extension of that, or it would be an extension of greeters that pull people into the store in the first place to try to generate foot traffic. So in that sense, I don't think there should be trepidation on their part, but I do think there is education absolutely that needs to be done, just like there would be for any other activity that we might take around technology. To your point, the train has left the station. The technology needs to come into the store. There's no 2 ways about that. The question is, what technology you're going to bring in, why? And if you believe in Doug's point about the storytelling, then a couple of these pieces of technology make a lot of sense. You're going to have to educate that store no matter what. So the question isn't if you have to educate them, it's how are you going to do that? One of the powers of robotics, and actually some of his platform, is this robot is now the expert on everything that's in your store because you can push that information to it just like that. So how then do you turn around and make it the teacher of your store personnel after hours, where maybe they used to have to watch some 15 or 20-minute video on the in-store TV before or after the store opened? Now Pepper can be sitting there educating them.
Yeah.
Right? So that functionality
It is a really
exists.
Engaging thing, too. I got to say, this is the first time I ever met Pepper in person. And it's really quite remarkable because you're sitting there having a conversation with someone and Pepper is looking at the 2 of you and the head keeps going back and forth and it's blinking and stuff. And you actually start to feel it is kind of human. I mean, it's remarkable. It's like a little puppy, somebody said,
That was sort of the point.
My question is Pepper male or female?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, thank you. That clears that up.
Yep.
So we're going to open it up now. I'm sure you guys might have some questions as well. And we do have, and if you don't mind just grabbing the roving microphone, you have a great opportunity to ask these 2 gentlemen what's on your mind about the technologies that they have? Does anybody have a question?
Way
Is there
back.
one back there? Yes.
So impressed with this crowd after a long night of
I know.
free drinking.
I'm telling you, you guys are quite remarkable.
In the States, nobody would show
I'm
up.
sure the biggest challenge you're going to have is finding those initial brave retail clients to work with you. With margins being as tight as they are and the cost associated with implementing some of these pilot tests, how are you going to help them get over that?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I think that we've been fortunate. I think AI, it feels like a necessary test area for a lot of brands, and so we've had actually overwhelming sort of response initially. So we launched with the North Face in December, and since that time we've signed a global cosmetic company that wants to build an app for in-store people to be able to help people buy the right cosmetics, makeup. We just signed up one of the largest banks in the world to build the bank of tomorrow, is kind of how they're packaging that up. And so I think that, I think it's like anything, it's the same bell curve. There's always going to be those pioneers that rush in to try the new technology, to figure it out and have that edge. And at this point, we're not seeing any impediments. We're seeing more demand than we can actually keep up to.
And I would think this base assumption is that these entities don't have funds set aside to go look at exactly this kind of technology in the first place. And I think that's fundamentally not right. I think they do have CapEx expenditures and potentially even OpEx. We could certainly work it in such a way that it was an OpEx spend, not a CapEx spend. I mean, these retailers, again, understand the importance of what they're trying to get accomplished. So the question to me isn't, do they have the funds to go do it? It's, have I positioned the value proposition of our program and our tools in such a way that they understand it and want to engage with it?
The beauty of what you both create here is that it really is measurable too, right? So it's not like a soft spend where you're saying, we want to build a social media outreach function or something, which is very difficult to measure, but you're very measurable in nature.
Yeah, I think one thing we talked about on the phone was, so I spent years growing up at Procter & Gamble, and I would buy end caps, right? And the only thing that I could use as a metric for my end cap spend was sales lift. Even though I might have known 10 million people walked into Loblaws that week, I was never allowed to use impressions as a metric. So that's still important to a brand, right? Absolutely. Discoverability is really at the heart of what he was talking about. The retail world for a shopper is very much about deselecting as much as it is selecting, right? And so you want discoverability, you want your ability to get out and jump in front of them. I could never use that as a metric, but with Pepper, now I understand how many people walked by, how many people interacted, and because we can evaluate the facial sort of expression into emotional understanding, I can tell you if that's a good impression or not. So now you go back to Procter & Gamble and say, that end cap you had, it had this kind of engagement, this kind of, maybe your sales lift was normal, but look how many more impressions you made, and look how many good impressions you made. Now start to connect that back potentially to a CRM program where we know that it's specifically Doug, and we have some really interesting analytics that can be done on the back end of that.
Yeah, which you're right, it nests beautifully into the whole idea of the store becoming a form of media. Because if you get pushback on that, if somebody says, well, we don't want to spend that much to have a robot that does nothing but measure impressions, well then you may as well just cancel all your TV advertising too, right? Because that's essentially the same. Right.
How many people drove by that billboard on the highway? I'm just curious, do you know?
Yeah,
no,
exactly.
You have no idea.
Or the radio ad, or yeah, exactly. So that's a really, really interesting way of looking at it. Any questions? We'll throw it back out to the group. Yes, sir.
So now that we've established the gender of Pepper,
Neutral.
the question is, does Pepper have the ability to discern the gender of the consumer that Pepper is interacting with? Because obviously that's a very important differentiation in retail.
That's a different kind of robot, I think, we're talking about.
Because men and women buy differently. So I'd like to know if
absolutely.
Pepper can actually
not
make
only
that
would we be able to tell you if it was man or woman, we could tell you their age. And so imagine Pepper sitting in front of a Lego experience at Toys R Us. It could have one message for the kids running up to it and saying, hey, this is the new Lego Star Wars thing. And then when mom walks up, a different message for mom, right there. So get back to the concept of omni-channel marketing. That's a contextually relevant message at that moment in time based off of who's standing there and what might be important to them at that moment in time. And it kind of comes back to your funnel, right?
It does. And interestingly, too, you mentioned emotion. And you know, marketers take a lot for granted, as we all know. I mean, and most of you are probably marketers in some way, shape, or form too. So things look great in your brain, right? But then when you execute at retail, oftentimes it doesn't translate real well to retail. And that ability to measure emotion and say after 30 days or even 30 minutes in a store, how many consumers that look at this are happy about it, are confused about it, are perplexed, and be able to change on the fly instead of an end cap, where, as you say, 30 days later, all I can see is how many units.
But then go back to the predictive analytics you mentioned earlier. So now we know what's the gender, what's the age range at that moment in time. So you start day parting, and then what region you're in. Now you have all of a sudden the ability to start doing some predictive analytics around potentially your inventory. Where should that be? What trends are happening? How do you think about the eastern side of Canada versus the western side of Canada? What might be going which direction insofar as trends? So it starts to be really interesting.
Tactically huge. Yeah. Great question. Thank you. Anyone else?
Gentleman right here.
Over here. Yes, sir. Ant's getting his pre-party or post-party.
When I was here a few years ago, I guess tablets and stands that sort of held the tablet seemed to be all the rage. With something, I always sort of envisioned after that there might be some kind of AI behind it and helping people make their decisions. Now, do you think, though, like with something like Pepper, that they can kind of make that leap ahead of something like that? Or do you see this kind of being more a slow evolutionary thing where we might have one Pepper in a store and a bunch of stands and then slowly move that way?
Or yeah, it's definitely going to be a blended world, and I think a lot of it will be in the hands of the staff. I mean, again, when I look at how we're using AI, it's increasingly about empowering and accelerating the intelligence of the staff, and giving them the ability to make better recommendations. That to me is a handheld device. And so when I think of Pepper, I mean, I think it's absolutely phenomenal. That's great technology, and could imagine a world where, you know, maybe Pepper's sort of at the front line, and sort of like, if you think of the marketing funnel as a qualification process, Pepper's sort of doing all the hard work of greeting everybody and potentially guiding people. But then as they come deeper into the store, that's where your team is sitting with, you know, AI-powered handhelds, able to make super laser sharp, great product recommendations on maybe higher involvement type products or things that require more contextual information like weather patterns. That to me sounds like a pretty phenomenal 1-2 punch.
And I think there's a modicum of the need to understand what's the shopper issue that you're overcoming with this technology. And I think that's something that certainly the retail world would jump into tech and they'd never sort of get that nugget first. So that tablet thing that you were talking about, those are effectively kiosks. I don't know how many of you have employed kiosks, but they are shockingly poorly used in retail for the most part. There might be a few examples that are, but I recall being asked to spend several $100,000 by a US retailer to install a kiosk, which we told them they shouldn't do in the first place, and it ended up being used one time per month per store. And that was a very painful, long process that they engaged, because they never understood what was the shopper need that they were overcoming. And I think your question actually is a really good one at its heart, because you shouldn't put Pepper in the store if you don't understand what Pepper's going to do for your shoppers. You shouldn't put any AI or any of these kinds of tech in if you haven't answered that question first. So that's sort of an extension of I think the point you just made.
And that is so true, and I'm so glad to hear you say that, because there are so many technology companies that would say, so many technology companies would say, no, you should definitely embark on what we're doing, and they're kind of promoting that jump without thought. But you're right. And the reason that so many technologies, I think, so many technological initiatives fail is because they say I'm hearing it with beacons, right? I'm hearing from CMOs all over the place saying, oh, we got to do something with beacons this year because beacons are the hot thing. So they're going to install beacons. They won't work because they're detached from the experience. They'll fail, and everyone will blame beacons, right? Not the fact that they didn't plan appropriately for them. So that goes back to that idea of mapping the experience out again and finding the right junction within the experience where Pepper makes contextual sense, right? And where it fits with the brand's story and ideals, and same with AI, right? It's about architecture, I guess, and design.
I have a question. Can I ask a question?
Sure, of course.
I would love, I mean, I thought his presentation was amazing, very inspiring, and would love to kind of hear you talk a little bit more about what's your ideal store of the future? You know, what storytelling, what experiential elements? I mean, do you have kind of an idea on that?
Well, everything in the store is free. And no.
Tiffany's.
Yeah. Legal looting, sort of. No, I mean, I just find that what's missing for me is I believe the chasm between online and offline is growing all the time. I think that as consumers, we feel that tension. I go online, I can find a myriad of really interesting products. I'm presented with all kinds of cool stuff. I can get incredible information and reviews and watch videos. And then I go to a store and I just find the selections are ho-hum, the information is spotty. I can't really, I can't trust the information that I get, and it's just sort of not all that interesting. So I really look forward to the day when we can start to migrate some of that great web content into the store environment, where I can sort of seamlessly shop kind of an online-offline experience at the same time, where products, because I'm not depending on square foot sales as a buyer, where I can start to bring in some new and exciting products. I mean, if I go to the mall, I want it to be exciting, I want it to be like a theme park almost, but not in a phony way, not in a silly way. I just want great product and brand experiences, So that's sort of in abstract what I'm hoping for.
Very cool.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you
you
very much for coming.
Thank
Thank you for coming too.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Good job, man.
Enjoy the day.